of the Lord. Anyone who wants to be first among you must be slave to all. This gospel is asking us to consider slavery. Slavery is a terrible thing. It's still present in some parts of our world, and even occasionally we see elements of slavery even in our own country. But what do we know of slavery from the time of Jesus? What is this slavery that Jesus is talking about? In a Roman context, ancient Roman context, a lot of people had slaves. A lot of people were bought and sold almost like property as slaves. Slaves were used in a military context. They were often the first to die. Slaves were the first put into the most difficult situations, working conditions, dreadful for them. Slaves were often mistreated, and they were ones they could just do away with easily. Here we have Jesus saying that anyone who wants to be first amongst you must be slave to all. And this is what Jesus brings upon himself. He is the first amongst us. And as Christians, we should be desiring to be Christ. So how does Christ become the slave? Christ gives himself freely, perhaps not like a slave, but he is willing to die first. A little bit like they put the slave up to die first in a battle. Jesus dies first. Jesus is the one who becomes the servant in a way that's beyond the way we understand servanthood. He gives everything. This is radical in the way that Jesus was talking about. Imagine a Roman citizen hearing this passage. How would they react? They knew they were free. And Jesus is saying, no, you should be willing to give your life in service, almost like a slave. Over the last few months, a lot of our freedoms have been restricted. And here we are, a lot of us gathering this evening for the first time. How will we use our freedom in the future? Will it just be to serve ourselves and our own needs? Or will we be willing to put ourselves last? To be dragged perhaps in a direction that we may not want to go at times? And the last few months have reminded me, and hopefully it's reminded all of us, that we are part of a community. That we make decisions not just for our own needs, but for the benefit of others. Many of us, well, all of us who are here in person this evening, have made choices to be vaccinated, to do that as a service for others. It is to protect ourselves, but it is also to create a community that's safe. And this is a good thing. Jesus asks us to be servants, to put ourselves last, almost as if our life is not of great value. There is something of greater value. This is what Jesus does. The idea of slavery brings an idea of humility as well. That we can be dragged in different directions. As Christians, we're called to be humble. Often, the human reaction to life is, especially when we have our rights taken away, is that we want to fight in response. And sometimes we've seen that over the last few months as well. Sometimes that's a prideful thing. We want to have control, we want to have power. And Jesus is saying, if you want to be first, if you want to be powerful, then we're called to put ourselves last. That's a hard thing to do. It's hard for me every day. It's probably hard for all of us. We like to wake up and think, what am I going to do today? As opposed to thinking, what is God's will for today? How am I called to bring God's will to the world? The way of goodness. And we can fail over and over again. That's part of what the Christian experience is that we fail. But we're called to recommit every day to not putting ourselves first. If we're called, as Jesus says, anyone who wants to be first among you must be the slave to all. As Christians and even as Catholics here in Australia, over the last few years we've been doing everything we can to eliminate modern day slavery. Slavery is a terrible thing when it's imposed upon a person. Here Jesus, slavery is not imposed upon him. He freely chooses to put himself in the most vulnerable position in love for others. Let's do what we can to eliminate modern day slavery where it's imposed upon people. Let us freely choose to put others, to put God, to put community before ourselves, to put the service of others first. Anyone who wants to be first among you must be the slave to all. Let us pray for true humility, for true servanthood, to accept the will of Christ and to live it out with courage and with love and service every day.